Welcome to Our World on CGTN. I'm Li Qiuan in Beijing. China's International Fair for Trade and Services has wrapped up in Beijing this week. The 5-day event attracted thousands of domestic and international enterprises. Ethiopia was one of the countries attending the recently concluded CIFTIS. This next segment by the Ethiopia Broadcasting Corporation highlights the performance of Ethiopia's businesses that attended the fair, as well as a reveal of China-Ethiopia trade over the past few years.
Since early this week, China has attracted over 2,200 enterprises from 75 countries for its International Fair for Trade and Service CIFTIS. The event happens at Beijing annually, aiming to bring Chinese and other global enterprises together. Ethiopia has been part of the event over the past few years, and several private and government companies were in attendance in the just concluded 2023 International Fair for Trade and Service CIFTIS. So joining me now is Demis Makriel, our editor with the English News Department. Good to speak to you, Demis. So what more can you tell us about the China International Fair for Trade and Service CIFTIS?
Thank you very much, Tabitha. As you rightly said, the China International Fair for Trade and Service has bringing a number of Chinese enterprises with other global stakeholders annually. Launched back in 2012, the China International Fair for Trade and Service, which we may call shortly CIFTIS, has been growing over the years, and presently it covers 12 major sectors, ranging from travel, transport to other financial services, among other things. So the business relationship between Ethiopia and China has been growing over the years, and there are many government and private enterprises that currently have business ties with a number of Chinese business companies. So the China International Fair for Trade and Service, an exhibition actually, gives a good opportunity for a number of Ethiopian companies to showcase their services. A good case in point in this regard is the one in my background, the Ethiopian Airlines, one of the fast growing and the largest airlines in Africa. Of course, the Ethiopian Airlines commenced its service to China 50 years ago, and presently it's celebrating its 50 years of anniversary of that. And the airline is also working to resume its flight levels to the pre-COVID level. Presently, the Ethiopian Airlines is working to have 35 passenger flights in a week. But the airline already has 31 cargo flights. So Ethiopian Airlines will have a totally 65 flights per a week to China very shortly. So exhibitions like CIFTIS have been providing much opportunity for Ethiopian Airlines and other domestic enterprises to showcase their services to their global clients and to advance their business interests, Tabitha.
Demis, what is your assessment on other Ethiopian enterprises' participation at the CIFTIS?
There are a number of international exhibitions happening in China almost around the year, and there are many local government and private enterprises that participate in those exhibitions. One example worth mentioning here is the Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Authority, which has actually a good business ties with China. And let me put it in a very substantive way. Back in 2021 and 2022, the Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Authority, of course, earned more than 1.4 billion USD from the coffee export, the highest of all the time actually. And during that time, China was the 8th largest Ethiopian coffee importer. That means China has a lot of interest in terms of Ethiopian coffee import. So the Ethiopian Coffee and Tea Authority participated in a number of exhibitions happening in China, benefited from those exhibitions and advanced its business interests, is a good example for that business ties. Actually, Ethiopia will officially join the BRICS in the coming January, so the country will have much opportunity to work with different Chinese companies and other emerging economies so that it can advance its business relationship with China and other BRICS members. So there are much opportunities for Ethiopia in the coming years to advance its business interests and to do much business with China in particular and to other BRICS members in general, Tabitha.
Demis Macrae joining us live from the Ethiopian Airlines headquarters. Thank you so much for your explanations. Now, of course, China and Ethiopia have growing relations both in terms of trade and investment. Now, let's take a look at some figures from 2021. In 2021, bilateral trade between Ethiopia and China amounted to $2.66 billion, showing a 3.3% increase from previous years. Chinese exports to Ethiopia amounted to $2.29 billion in 2021, showing a 2.6% increase from previous years. The main Chinese exports to Ethiopia being items such as machinery, textiles, plastics, and vehicles. When we come to Ethiopia's exports to China, the figures are $370 million in 2021, showing an 8.1% increase from previous years. Major Ethiopian exports to China being oilseeds, coffee, leather products, and minerals. Now, these figures show that Ethiopia has a lot more work to do in terms of boosting its exports to China. Work is being done in that aspect, and as you can see, tangible results are being registered in that area. When we come to Chinese investment in Ethiopia, Chinese FDI amounted to $90.39 million in 2021. The total Chinese FDI in Ethiopia, the cumulative figures, is $4 billion. Major investment areas being transportation, electricity, manufacturing, and other aspects. Chinese FDI have so far employed 110,000 Ethiopians. Now, these figures speak for themselves, but let's have some deeper insights into the matter. Joining me here at studio is Medina Negatu, the global chairperson of the Fairfax Africa Fund and also a well-known investment consultant. Thank you so much for joining me here at studio, Medina. It is such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
So earlier, we've been looking at some figures depicting the trade exchange between Ethiopia and China. So how do you think Ethiopia can work with the Chinese for a win-win cooperation?
Right, that's a very good question, and I will answer it in multiple platforms. First and foremost, the trade relationship between Ethiopia and China has been steadily growing over the last 15 to 20 years. And today, China is one of the largest trading partners of Ethiopia. On the other side, China also, of course, exports billions of dollars worth of goods to Ethiopia, including services, by the way, if you include, for example, construction services. So for both countries, the relationship is very important, is steadily growing. Of course, the recent addition of Ethiopia to the BRICS, I think, will strengthen the relationship further. So on the trade front, I would expect over the next several years, trade between those two countries will grow very significantly, which benefits both sides. On the investment side, which is, I think, for me, an even more interesting trend, China is probably the largest foreign investor in Ethiopia. I've seen some numbers that say it's several $billion. And that, the important side of it is because a lot of Chinese manufacturing has moved from China to Ethiopia. If you look at a lot of the industrial parks we have in Ethiopia today, a lot of it is occupied by Chinese investors. The other part of it, which is the soft part of it, they can also collaborate on geopolitics. You know, the recent addition of Ethiopia to BRICS, and as you saw, there was a lot of discussion, even in the United States. What does it mean? Well, the result is the global South, as it's so called, can now have a voice in how decisions are made on trade, on investment around the world, as opposed to in the past, the order that we see, the global trade order that we see, even the WTO, these are institutions created right after the Second World War, when a lot of these countries, emerging economies, not even China or India or Ethiopia, didn't have a voice. Now, through the BRICS and other platforms and the strong trade relationships among the global South, they can strengthen and have, as you said, a win-win relationships.
So we keep on mentioning the BRICS. So how can Ethiopia further endorse this mechanism and also further benefit from it?
Two things. One is the BRICS are supposed to be a counterbalance to the global order today, as I said earlier, which was created by the United States after the end of the Second World War. The World Bank, the IMF, the UN, all these institutions were created when even most of these countries that are now BRICS members and others who want to join were not even independent countries. So the BRICS now have a big voice. They're a third of global GDP. They're 40% population of the world. And actually, on a purchasing power parity basis, on a PPP basis, the BRICS already outrank the G7. They're 37% of global GDP. But fast forward 10, 15, 20 years, countries like Ethiopia, who just recently joined, Saudi Arabia, these are going to be very powerful countries in the future. So as part of the grouping of the BRICS, they'll not only have a voice, but they set the agenda. That means we will have a multipolar world, which benefits the world. I mean, today we have a unipolar world, although China is now very influential, very powerful, but through the BRICS, it can create a balanced world. And how Ethiopia can contribute is multiple ways. One, as I mentioned earlier, it's a fast-growing economy. It's been one of the fastest-growing economies in the world for the last 15 years. And then for 10 years in a row, according to the IMF data, it was the fastest-growing economy in Africa. Also, as I mentioned, Ethiopia is sometimes referred to as the China of Africa because it's now looking to be an industrial economy. A lot of industrial manufacturing is moving to Ethiopia. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of BRIC countries would like to outsource their manufacturing, especially labor-intensive manufacturing, to Ethiopia so they can buy it. The final part of it is the BRICS Bank. Ethiopia, now being a member of the BRICS Bank, can source additional financing in addition to the World Bank and other institutions from the BRICS banks. And the BRICS can also, by lending to Ethiopia, can benefit from Ethiopia's economic growth. So all around, both sides, both the existing BRICS members and the newcomers like Ethiopia can contribute to the BRICS and specifically in this discussion to the China-Ethiopia relationship.
Yeah, so Ethiopia as the seat of the African Union,
Right.
What can we do to spearhead sustainable development on the continent?
Right. As you know, the African Union has this 2063 agenda. To be honest with you, it's too far out there, but it's an agenda out there. But the seat of the African Union is here. The founding member of the African Union is Ethiopia. And as I mentioned, one of the anchor countries in Africa. If you look at on a relative scale of which are the more important countries, I'm not suggesting anyone is not important, but you have to scale them. Ethiopia is one of them, one of the 5 countries. I look at South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Ethiopia, Kenya. I mean, these are sort of tier 1 important countries, strategically, economically important countries. So as being here in Addis, being headquarters in Addis, it can help shape the AU thinking, but it can also contribute. You remember, it used to contribute a lot to the African Union peacekeeping forces and other things. So if Ethiopia grows its economy, the whole region benefits from it. The stability comes to this part of the world. The Horn of Africa, as you know, is very unstable. So there are a lot of benefits for the African Union to being here, for Ethiopia being a very anchor participant in the African Union, and going forward, hopefully, as it grows and it stabilizes the region, that's good for the African Union.
Yeah, good. So this year marks the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right.
And so how does this initiative, with its high direction and high growth trajectory, fit in with Ethiopia's green economy?
Right. I'm glad you actually mentioned the green economy. Today, 98% of Ethiopia's energy is renewable, clean burning. And in fact, in the West, they're trying to migrate to where Ethiopia is. Now, we were latecomers to the greening of the economy. Maybe we benefit from it. But that's something actually not just BRICS or China or others, but even the West can learn. Now, even China, I think, can learn from Ethiopia's greening process. As you know, 40 years ago when China started this trajectory of growth, it grew at any cost. But now they realized later on it was polluting the ecosystem and all that. They started cleaning up. Now, China is very wealthy today. It can clean up the rivers. So we also can learn from that and say, that's not what we want to do. So we are at the forefront of greening. I mean, the greenness that is starting to happen in Ethiopia, all our energy, and this is not an exaggeration, 98% of our energy is renewable. A lot of countries envy that. And you know, look at China today. It's the world's largest electric vehicle market, EVs, right? I mean, imagine that. We in Ethiopia can easily adopt EV policies because we can just plug in because electricity is available. Electricity is the cheapest on earth at 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Yeah. So there's a lot actually Ethiopia can teach other countries, not just China or the BRICS countries, but even the West, how to green your economy, how to focus on being a 98% renewable country.
Zemadina Nagatu, thank you so much for speaking to us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Well, viewers, we've come to the end of today's edition. Many thanks for watching. We'll catch you soon.
That's our special segment from Ethiopia. Let's talk more about the bilateral cooperation between China and Ethiopia. Let me bring in Professor Jiang Gong, Vice President of Research and Strategy at the University of International Business and Economics in Israel. Professor, great to see you. Now, China has more than 1,000 direct investment projects in Ethiopia, creating over 560 jobs. How do you see the future of development of bilateral cooperation?
Well, thank you very much for having me. This interview was pretty good. I add some more information and more insight to this. I think what we are talking about is actually a very good model related to the Belt and Road Initiative from China. Ethiopia is one country that has seen intensive and fairly large amount of foreign direct investment from China. It's a very populous country with a very large population. Labor cost is very reasonable. It's also, very good labor force in my view. The education level is pretty high compared to other African countries. So it's ideal for the kind of manufacturing that we actually hope that can, low-end manufacturing can be moved, labor-intensive manufacturing can move to other countries, and definitely Ethiopia will be a very good choice. For the last few years, this is exactly what happened. Now, Ethiopia, in my view, could have done even better. If we didn't see this civil war going on for several years in Ethiopia between the Tigray and the central government and the Amhara province. Fortunately, that war has stopped. Things have resumed back to normal. And I think I would expect the moving forward more investment coming from China. I think these numbers we're talking about compared to 2020, 21. We should take it with a grain of salt because these are the years that Ethiopia is going through a civil war, in fact, right? So I think I would imagine a lot more investment moving forward, given that peace has come back to Ethiopia. So I'm very optimistic about the future prospect of Ethiopia, especially in consideration of the very good bilateral relationships on the political side between the two countries.
Yeah, Ethiopia is a country rich in natural and labor resources. It also has huge market potential. But how can China and Ethiopia further develop their market economy?
Well, I think really for an economy like this, the hope is social waste, manufacturing, and industrialization. There's a lot of room for growth in the manufacturing sector. For labor-intensive manufacturing, for adding values for the exports model. And as a matter of fact, a lot of these things actually being exported back to China, which is a good thing in my view. We have seen quite a bit of industrial parks being set up in the capital city, Addis Ababa. And also, Chinese companies be moving in. I mean, CNN once showcased it put a detailed report on a Chinese invested shoe manufacturing, employing, I remember it's like over 10,000 people. It's a huge, huge shoe factory. And that shoe factory exports a lot of shoes to the European Union, to America, and of course, exporting some back to China as well. And this is a typical example how a country can benefit from foreign direct investment in labor-intensive manufacturing as a developing country. And I think this is the way to go.